Okay, hello troopers. Do we have any Star Trek fans here? Or, okay, like hardcore fans? Okay, apologies. And the rest of you, you'll do great, you'll do fine. Yeah, I'll just start off then. We're doing post-exploitation Office 365. I'm a red team operator, so I want to talk you through my approach of gaining my goals when I do initial compromise or when I get initial access to Office 365. A bit about myself. My name is Melvin Langvik. I'm a Norwegian. I go by the handle Flangvik pretty much everywhere online, Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, you name it. I used to be a developer, so I used to create C# applications running within the Azure cloud environment, typically doing like data formatting and transformation with older applications such as BizTalk, if anybody hears about BizTalk, some legacy stuff, for clients in Norway. And then I got into penetration testing and was eventually really lucky and landed a job with TrustedSec. I work at their targeted operations team, which is essentially the red team. I have the absolute honor of performing targeted attacks against some really big clients in the US, and it's really cool. I get to see a lot of stuff and play in a lot of big environments. I also have some contributions within the open source offensive security space, such as Team Filtration, which I'll talk more about, Amsifail, Cobalt Bus, and Sharp Collection. If anybody does CTFs or Hack the Box, maybe you heard about Sharp Collection. I stream every Sunday at 6 p.m. UTC. That is a lie. You see the every being curved. I try to stream every Sunday, and I usually do, but sometimes it's difficult. That's 8 p.m. German time or Norwegian time, 6 p.m. UTC. I create okay content on YouTube. Nothing more than that, and I strongly believe Nano is better than Vim. Yeah, ooh, bold statement you got there, right? Okay, so this is all about red teaming, so we got to talk a bit about the red team kill chain. This is what it typically looks like. This is what it has been looking like for a solid amount of time. I have no idea where this originates from, who made this, who put this as the standard. But apparently we're supposed to do initial reconnaissance, initial compromise, establish a foothold, and then we get into the circle of attempting to escalate privileges, doing more internal reconnaissance, and then moving and maintaining present, and eventually we hopefully reach our goal, our mission defined by the client. This approach doesn't always even make sense in modern red teaming, but it doesn't make sense in targeting Office 365. If we exclude on-prem environments and we're targeting AAD, Office 365, then this doesn't really make sense. So I came up with something else, which is potentially just horrible, but I'll try, where I think we should do recon, initial compromise, aka we get access to an account, and then we start doing data exfiltration, and based on that data, we go into the circle of moving horizontally, laterally, or performing social engineering based on the data. I am excluding like hardcore misconfigurations in the AAD environment because typically you won't, I can't say typically won't find, but in my data set, I don't see that a lot, so this has become the norm. When I say move horizontally, I mean move from the cloud on-prem. And when I say move laterally, that's just moving between single sign-on services in the Office 365 cloud environment. I'll talk more about it. Okay, so this is what I think red teaming O365 should look like. Quickly, let's just cover some initial access methods because it's interesting. Password spraying, typical, it's very common, it sounds very dumb, but it's really effective. You take a password, you attempt that password against all the accounts one time, and then you wait a specific amount of time, and then you try again with another password. If you do this long enough with really, really shitty passwords like summer 2023, January 2023, welcome at 123 bang, like you all probably have one of those passwords or heard about people having those passwords somewhere. At some point you will get access to an account or you will get valid credentials. Credential phishing is typical, sending out links either via SMS, email, or getting people to give away their credentials in some other fashion. Device code phishing recently become really popular, where you actually entice the user to allow an application within Azure to access data on behalf of them and essentially gain access to the account through an application registered in Azure instead of getting access to their credentials. Post-compromise, you also have a lot of ways to get access to the O365 cloud. Token exfiltration, I think, is really handy. Adam Chester, a colleague of mine, wrote a blog post about token caching and token caches on Windows systems. Turns out OneDrive and Office applications running on Windows hosts just stores tokens on disk and then encrypted by the Win API. So you can decrypt that and use them and just access the cloud. You could also scrape tokens from memory, like a lot of Office 365 applications are C#, which means that they have strings easily exposed in memory, which you could pick out using a number of tools, just dumping the memory space and looking at doing strings, and you'll find tokens. And then you could do cookie exfiltration, getting the cookies out of the browser. You could do credential exfiltration, essentially getting the user to give away credentials from the machine or finding files with credentials. And then primary refresh token theft is really hot as well. Probably not as used, but it's amazing. It's essentially like getting an access token that's valid for 90 days off a machine. I said tokens quite a few times, so maybe I should explain what I mean by tokens. Tokens, or JWT tokens, or JOT tokens, are JSON Web Tokens. They typically look like this. They are typically inserted in a header in an HTTPS request under the authorization header with the prefix of bearer, and it typically starts with that string. And the reason it typically starts with that string is because the whole token is just a base encoded string with three major elements: a head, a payload, and a signature. And the header, the colon, and then the alg for algorithm is always going to be the same, and therefore you get that static beginning of a token. So if you see that string, it's interesting, you want it. And if you see that string and you want to figure out what it does, you can go over to a website called jwt.io and paste it in, and it will decode it into the header, payload, and signature, and then you can take a look at the payload properties. Now for Office 365, the payload properties look something like this. I'll talk about access token versus refresh token in a bit, but if you decode an access token assigned to an Office 365 tenant, you'll see something like this. You'll see audience, or I like to call it resource, which indicates what API the token is valid for. You'll see EXP, expiration, which is the POSIX timestamp for when this token will expire. And you'll see a display name and app ID for the application, some names related to the user who had the access token, and then this SCP line here, permissions, really interesting. This is essentially what this access token is capable of doing against this resource. So this access token can upload and download files, essentially, from the Graph API. And then you have tenant ID and UPN, user principal name, which is all just identifying which user this access token belongs to. Refresh token versus access token. Access token is easily identifiable, like I showed you, and it's not encrypted. You can read it. Refresh token is encrypted, and we can't read it, and it's essentially used to get another access token. So the flow is authenticate, you get an access token and a refresh token. The access token typically expires after an hour or so, and then you can use the refresh token to get another access token until the refresh token expires, which is much longer. So dealing with tokens can be a pain. You find it, okay, you figure out what it can do, what it had access to, but now what, right? That's why I strongly recommend using a tool by Durkan, who ironically is having the talk at the same time as me, so I deeply appreciate you all being here and not attending his talk, even though his talk is great. It's the #1 Python tool, or #1 tool in general, for dealing with authentication in AAD. You can do stuff like this. So he has, within Road Tools, which is on GitHub, there's a tool called Road TX, which essentially allows you to muck around with tokens. So if you have a browser session, let's say you log in or you phish somebody and you get their cookie, you can turn that into a token or tokens. And then you can use that to talk to the APIs and gather the data automatically. We'll get back to that. PRT, if you compromise the host and you manage to steal their PRT and session key and decrypt it, you could use that to start your own interactive browser session accessing Office 365. If you have a KeyPass, so I didn't know this, but I know this, but he has support for authenticating using KeyPass. What I didn't know is that a lot of people apparently store their O365 together with their MFA stuff in KeyPass. I haven't seen that before. I've seen a lot of on-prem stuff and a lot of dumb passwords, but I haven't seen O365 in KeyPass before. So you could use KeyPass libraries to, not library, what's it called, like the vault, the keep as vault file to authenticate. Device registration, if you get access to an access token, you can use that to register a new device on behalf of the user, pretending to add another Windows machine or mobile phone. And you can get the PRT and stay authenticated for longer. And you can enrich PRT with claims if you need to do something specific. It's great. I highly recommend it. Go to the GitHub and check it out. It will save your life when you're playing around with tokens. Okay, so that's tokens, that's initial access. The thought process behind this is that we're going to assume we have initial access, we're going to assume we have a token, and we can use road tools to turn that token into a lot of different things. Now what? This is the map, in my mind. And I created this, so it's by no means accurate, so I'm sorry for you guys taking screenshots, but I don't want to be like, this is it. But in my mind, this is it. So you have initial access, and this is the way I go about when I want to see what I can do with this initial access. First and foremost, I do data exfiltration. So as a default user in Office 365, you have access to the Graph API, both of them, SharePoint, Outlook, Microsoft Teams, and OneDrive. And these are all gold mines of data. How many times have I compromised the user's email account, logged into Outlook, click on Notes. You guys know about Notes inside Outlook? And you just see passwords, social security numbers, API keys. Like, people just put stuff in there. It's a gold mine. Same with OneDrive. People upload passwords.txt, passwords.excel files, whatever. It's all there. It's just shared in the cloud now, and we can access it. Microsoft Teams, a lot of people share stuff in Teams chats, Teams conversations. Hey, what's the password for the FTP server? Here it is, you know? It's all over. Single sign-on. This is supposed to be a security feature, meaning like in a good way, but I'm starting to think maybe it's not that great because, you know, if I get access to Office 365 and you have either of these applications as supported through single sign-on, I can now access all these applications. I see it all the time. The most common ones, I think, are Salesforce, ServiceNow, I see all the time, Atlassian, and GitHub stuff. Like, I get access to the Office 365 portal, and then I just go to apps, and like, here is everything, and I just go through it. And it has a lot of data. Like ServiceNow, if you didn't know, any user in ServiceNow, typically even with the lowest privileges, can go to the pages where they list computers and users and extract it. So essentially getting to ServiceNow means that I now know where all the computers are at and which location, and depending on how much data you have in ServiceNow, of course, but gold, a lot of data. Oh, sorry, I have more. Credentials, right? Those credentials might work in other places. Some shady legacy portals, some VDI environments, VPN solutions. You might be able to reuse the credentials. And social engineering. And this is the thing I tend to the most, where I use the data. This is really what the talk is about, honestly. So most of the examples I'll talk about afterwards are from real engagements, where I take what I get from the access, I perform post-compromise social engineering, and I gain something. And the reasoning behind this is that if I know everybody who you've been talking to on email, everybody you talk to on Teams, it's much easier for me to impersonate them. It's much easier for me to generate or create social engineering pretext that matches you better, because I have so much data about your day-to-day activities as an employee. Watering hole, that's an old like definition. But it really works in Office 365. Like, if I go into the SharePoint and I modify the onboarding page, or I modify the VPN setup page to instead point to another link than the VPN download that it's supposed to point to, then every new onboarding member is going to set up my file instead of the actual VPN. And like, SharePoint is a permission nightmare. Like, people can do anything. People can create new pages, change pages. Like, just at least what I see, like, permissions are just out there. SharePoint's for everybody. So that's how I think about this. I don't think about O-days. I don't necessarily think about hard misconfigurations in AAD. I think about the data available, the services available, and what I can do with it. So we know what we want to do. We know sort of how we want to think. How do we do it? There's a couple of tools. And this is also self-made, so I'm sorry taking screenshots. It's probably not perfect. I think 3 phases: recon, initial access, post-exploitation. These tools, depending on how far to the right they are, represent what you can use them for. So team filtration, which is my tool, shameless plug, which we'll talk more about, and AAD internals can be used for everything. Road tools is specifically brilliant after initial access, and Microburst and Azure Hound, didn't find the correct picture, is also really brilliant after initial access. Okay, Star Trek fans. We want to find the... What do we want to find? Data, correct. Oh, that was hard inside, I'm sorry. Okay, we want to find the data. That's really what we want to do. We want to get in, we want to look at everything, and then we want to exfiltrate all the data. Let's take a look at some of the data points. Microsoft Teams. This is the endpoint. 100% undocumented. It's not intended to be used by us. Microsoft wants it hidden away. So we have to dig to find information about that. Then we have to essentially reverse Microsoft Teams, the network flow, to see what we can do. Some of the information we typically find in Microsoft Teams: passwords, personal identifiable information, certificates, API keys, internal infrastructure. Literally the biggest thing, yeah, passwords are cool, API keys, whatever. Internal infrastructure, I want to know how thing works. I want to know where this user goes to get the elevated access to access RDP. I want to know where the documentation for this service is. I want to know that the internal SharePoint that is outdated doesn't have off and I can access that. Like, that's the thing I want to know. I don't want to know the context and the internal infrastructure. API keys, passwords, cool, but I want to know the internal stuff. Because essentially, red teaming is just onboarding yourself. That's what red teaming is. Contact list, who does what, who talks to who works under who. If I'm going to impersonate somebody, social engineer somebody, I want to know the relationship between employees so I know who to impersonate and what position to place myself in. Graph API, endpoint, and it's documented. So there are actually 2 Graph APIs. It's in typical Microsoft style. One being that they constantly rename every service they ever have every other week. And the other one being that they don't know how to decommission stuff, is that they have 2 Graph APIs. One is the legacy one that's referenced as the Azure Active Directory Graph API, and then you have the other one, which is the Microsoft Graph API. They're essentially the same. The API structure is essentially the same. The only difference is that the AAD API, Graph API, the older one, supplies more data related to AD. So when you're syncing between on-prem and cloud, that API exposes more data about the on-prem structures. It looks more like LDAP data than the Microsoft one, or than the newer one. It's actually documented, so it's easy to integrate and pull data from. Contains directory information, and this is also gold, like actual gold. Users, scenario, I'm password spraying, right? I do OSINT, I do enumeration, I find 300 users. I password spray these users over a week. I find 1 weak password. Luckily, I get past MFA, we'll talk more about it, and I dump this information. I now have every user in the company, and I can go back to spraying. And my attack surface is essentially much bigger, and I'll bet you I'll guess a bunch more passwords. Groups, well, I'll show you later. Group descriptions, gold. This group is used to enroll users with CrowdStrike. You use CrowdStrike. This group is used to enroll users with Arctic Wolf. You use Arctic Wolf. Like, it's a gold mine. I know what you use internally now. I can adapt. Tenant information, also interesting. Calendar, interesting. If I know you're in a meeting, if I know you're out on PTO, paid time off, if I know you're away for whatever reason, opportunities for me. Emails you can pull, files you can pull, so much more. So much more. Legacy Outlook. So technically, Outlook is supposed to use the new Graph API endpoint at some point. In real life, it doesn't do, and I can't imagine it's going to do it in many years. Therefore, I integrated this Outlook Office 365, which is the old Outlook API, which again is still used, but it's deprecated. It has documentation, but it's deprecated. Don't know what that means anymore. Yeah, you can pull email stuff. Emails plus attachments, the obvious stuff, password secrets, recovery information, BitLocker recovery key, Who has been sending out BitLocker recovery keys on emails and PDFs? Can I find them? Internal documentation, screenshots. More than once, I have been able to identify the software you use based on the screenshot from the onboarding documentations and the icons in the bottom right corner. Oh, is that semantic or is that, I gotta be crowdsourced. Oh, is it Cortex, right? I know what you use now, gold. PII, personal identifiable information, people are really good at scanning passports and sending them to themselves through the printer networks. Internal communication, context. Again, who talks to who does what? Who can I impersonate? Who do I want to become? How, oh, this is a gold one. How does the template for information look like? That doesn't make sense, but like different departments like HR, sales, IT, they send out newsletters, right? And they typically have a template, a structure. So if I take that template and send out my newsletter with information, it's a lot more trustworthy. I compromised a company once where I found their template for sending out internal emails online and fished externally, internally using it, and it was just like, of course they're going to click. It looks internal, right? Calendar information again, meetings, company travel, vacation paid time off, operational opportunities. It's much more likely, while unlikely, for me to be able to get service desk to reset the user's passwords if I'm impersonating him calling on a very important business travel. And I'm about to go into a very important meeting and I need my password now. Makes a lot more sense. Again, it's deprecated. I don't know what that means anymore. As announced 3 years ago, it will no longer get support. Please migrate. Wouldn't be surprised if this never gets deprecated. OneDrive files. I have to go a bit quick because I have a lot of stuff. These are the endpoints. They are documented. Again, internal files. Oh, the OneDrive synchronization stuff is brilliant. How many people have seen OneDrive synchronizing the desktop folder? Please be more than once. Yes. Okay, a lot of people. Okay, what does that also synchronize? Shortcuts. So if I have access to your OneDrive, I could replace your shortcuts. I could backdoor your files. I could upload the patch that I want you to run. Imagine getting a phone call from IT being, hey, we just uploaded the patch on your computer. Could you double-click it? It's on your desktop. Who wouldn't? You already got it on my desktop, right? Host system enumeration. A lot of link files obviously have paths. The paths contain information about the system. Are you using a shared server for home directory? Are you using a local folder for home directory? What's the on-prem SAM account name, etc.? Social engineering opportunities. I'm sorry for the speed. I have to go a bit quick. Team filtration. So this is the tool that's going to solve all your problems, and you're going to be happy for the rest of your life. And it's free, guys, and it's not a scam. So team filtration is a tool that's designed to attack Office 365. It was released from me at DEF CON last year during my talk, Taking a Dump in the Cloud. It has these modules, and it's amazing. So what you do is that you do all these modules in Team Filtration, and Team Filtration will keep track of everything. So if you enumerate users, it will store that in the database as valid users. And when you start spraying, it will keep track of every combination of password and username you've tried to make sure you don't try it again. It will keep track of the lockout account policy, so you don't accidentally lock out accounts. And once you reach a user, Team Filtration will enumerate the conditional access policy, store the access tokens in the database, and allow you to exfiltrate all the information I just talked about automatically. So you can turn a 2-minute breach. If I breach your account for 2 minutes, I can exfiltrate all the data I just mentioned in 2 minutes. All your emails, all your Teams chat conversations, all your Teams chat attachments, all your OneDrive files, the shared documents from SharedPod, the shared files that somebody else has shared with you. Everything. You can just download offline. I don't care if you kick me out. I can watch the data later. Looks something like this. Again, we enumerate valid accounts, goes back into the database. We move on to the spraying module. We pull out valid accounts because you don't need to give me that again. I have it. It's in the database. I spray. We find a valid account. We do exfiltration, and it stores everything, and you can just keep going. This is what it looks like, exfiltrating emails and OneDrive. So you see that I'm, so it's a bit hard to explain, or not hard, but like it's a bit weird right now, but this is in the exfiltration module, and since you have already guessed the password of a user, it's just going to be like, what user do you want to target, and then it's going to dump all the data. So this is a dummy account, so it only got 28 emails, It dumped the entire OneDrive, and it dumped the AAD. No, we didn't dump AAD. We only dumped email and OneDrive in this screenshot. And once you're done, and you move over to the best part of the engagement, which is reporting, right? Everybody loves it. Then you can use the database module, and it will summarize all the accounts. It will summarize the password spraying start and stop times, so that you can tell the client, this is when we password sprayed, please fine-tune your detections. More screenshots. Yeah, okay, so you know I talked about road tools, right? The Dirk-Jan's tool, the guy you choose not to watch today. I added support for his tool in Team Filtration, so you could use road tools to get the tokens, and then you can provide the output path, the output file from road tools, which is road tools auth, give it to Team Filtration. Team Filtration will exfiltrate all the data using that access. Okay, now that I've sufficiently sped up, we can stop the stream, because I want to show you some screenshots. And there are blurred, so I'm not going to jail, but I don't want it online. So you're just going to wait for that. It's kind of like this meme.